Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning. Just giving it a second, or rather a few seconds, for those of you to come in and join me. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I hope everyone is doing well. I do want to say good morning to each and every one of you. Good morning, Lady Apostle. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Good morning, Lady Barbara. I see down there. Good morning. I hope everybody is doing well on this Monday. I know over the weekend, I lost not really lost, but he went on to be with the Lord, one of my relatives. And so it really, again, hit home those who are grieving. That has been one of the things that I have seemingly been praying for a lot. The number of people who are grieving at this time, who's either relatives or their close friends, some of them actually quite young, under the age of 50, leaving this earth. And so to those of you who may be grieving today, I want to let you know that there are some of us out here who are praying for you, that God would comfort you. The God of all comfort would bring you comfort. I know a little bit about that. My father and my grandmother passed away within 9 months of each other. They were actually some of my, earthly confidants. And so that was really hard to lose two confidants in less than a year. So I do understand that, grief and pain and those kinds of things are not something that you just want to brush off or brush aside. So I always encourage people to make sure you are allowing yourself to grieve and go through the process of that emotion. Make sure that you are in a place, in a space that you can talk to someone. And also, if you are dealing with grief this morning, I do have an ebook that I wrote to help people who are grieving kind of begin to cope and understand what that process might look like, but also at the same time to help those who have questions about how to minister to people who are grieving. It's kind of a what not to do manual, very brief, but kind of a what not to do. And I share some of my experiences, and it's helped a lot of people who are either grieving or who are saying, well, I don't know what to do in terms of how do I help someone who is grieving. So I do have an ebook. And if you will email me, and if you'd like a copy of that ebook, I will send it to you by email for free. It is online for purchase, but if you reach out to me and let me know that you are dealing with grief, or you want to learn how to better minister to people who are grieving, and just kind of avoid some things that people do that don't necessarily know that it could actually be offensive and make the situation worse than what it is, you can feel free to email me and request that. Just make sure you put in the heading ebook on grief, and then I will shoot you the copy of that. All right, because my main goal with that was to help people understand how to deal with people who are grieving, and the proceeds went to helping families cover funeral costs who were dealing with having to do the GoFundMe accounts and those kinds of things. So, excuse me 1 second. All right. Thought somebody was coming to my door. So, today, before we get into our reading, I am seeing a disturbing trend. And the trend is that just let them be themselves. Just let them be themselves. Especially within the African American culture. I took a look at some videos last night, and I was reading the commentary about some of our well-known celebrities, and the commentary kept being on a consistent basis. This person is just being themselves. They're just being themselves. Let them do them. What's the other one I kept seeing over and over again? Some of us are hating on others because we have a problem with their behavior. We're hating on them because we have a problem with their behavior. And I'm going to write what that behavior is. And then, because I don't want to name names, because to me this is bigger. This particular thing is bigger than naming names of people who are operating in what I call the economy of this. All right. Anybody familiar with this word? If you are familiar with this word, you can press the hearts. If you're watching my YouTube live stream, you can just say yes. Okay? Okay. So, right now, we have there's a multi-million-dollar opportunity, okay, available for anybody who is willing to act ratchet. Okay? It's available. If you want to be uncouth, if you want to be, how can I put it? If you want to be uncouth, if you want to be out of order in public, I'll put it that way. If you want to be the person who is awkward in social settings in a ghettoized way, there is money for you. I'm not even going to deny that there is lots of money in the culture of ratchetness. All right. And so when we see it, and people are trying to bring correction to it, right? We get a whole group of people that say they're just being themselves, or they're just being real, or they're just keeping it, as we like to say. They're just keeping it 100. Right? Uh-oh, some of my people are saying they're freezing. They're just keeping it 100. I don't know what's going on with Periscope lately, but it's been freezing up on me. So hopefully you all can see and hear me clearly. Okay? So there's a culture of ratchetness, a culture of ghetto is cool, and they are just keeping it 100. And then some people say, you should not address this because that is just who they are. They're keeping it real. And you have a measure of self-hate if you are not okay with this kind of behavior. All right. The reality is we should be concerned about this kind of behavior because it's being, excuse me, it's being normalized as something that black people do. So it's not being normalized for everybody else's culture. It's being normalized for our culture. It's being normalized that ratchet equals black. That should concern you. It's being normalized that ratchetness equals blackness. And I know plenty of people that are not ratchet. Matter of fact, most of the people I know are not ratchet. Okay? So, my problem with this is ratchetness does not equal realness. When somebody says they're just being themselves, all right? Let's be clear that ratchet does not equal real. It does not. Ratchetness does not equal being real. The reality is, if we look at the history behind ratchetness, we will see that it comes from minstrelsy. It comes from blackface and people who would put on blackface and they would mock black people and say this is how they all are. All right? So now we don't necessarily need white people putting on blackface to mock blackness. We now have black people doing it. All right? And it's more convincing because a black person is doing it. So then we say, well, this person is being themselves. So then my next question then becomes, if that is themselves, all right, if ratchetness is what we feel like the person is being themselves, when do we move from ratchetness to when do we move to that? Or are we just saying that it's okay for this image to go and not just affect the United States? This is not just an image that's being pushed here in the United States. This is an image of black people and black women in particular that is being pushed around the world. Around the world. So, I'll give you an example. When hip hop first came out, right? People were all for all of the ratchetness of hip hop. And they were saying, this is who we are. This is what we want to do. And now the originators of some of the stuff that went around the world are now coming back and saying, you know what? I have some regrets. I have some regrets about the image that we portrayed of black women. I have some regrets about the image that we portrayed of black women because that image went around the world. That image that started over in America went around the world. And then everybody started thinking that this was who black women were. Why? Because there wasn't a whole lot of other portrayals that were reaching the worldwide market. All right? And so as people celebrate ratchetness and they make ratchetness equal to black culture, which it's not, I just want you to understand that there are ramifications for that. So, when you applaud ratchetness, all right, and 10, 15, 20 years from now, your children and your grandchildren get locked out of opportunity because people began to equate black with ratchet, I want you to remember this time in history when there were people saying that this is harmful to the culture. And then someone said, well, why does one black person has to represent all of us? That's a good question. Why does what one black person does what one black person does represent all of us? I would say it doesn't necessarily represent all of us, but if this one person that's doing the behavior has a worldwide platform, all right, then that one person who goes all over the world does represent us, whether they want to or not, whether they signed up for it or not, whether they signed up to be the spokesperson or not. There is a ramification that happens when one person of influence behaves in a certain way, and that message is propagated all over the world. All right? So, I want us to think about the fact that keeping it ratchet is not keeping it real. I want us to think about the fact that, especially if we have a measure of influence, that what we do in the world matters, and it is a reflection of not just ourselves and not just our families, but also our communities. Somebody is going to disagree, but there's enough evidence out that shows that we are a reflection that goes out, and people begin to make assumptions about the whole of us based on the few. What was so powerful about the movie Black Panther? Well, we just said it. It was image. It was image. One of the things that was powerful about it was the fact that people understood that many of the images or many of the roles that were shown in the movie were not roles that people on a worldwide scale had seen coming from black people. All right? And if we want to make a joke about it, certain people wouldn't be allowed, ratchetness wouldn't be allowed in Wakanda. All right? The ratchetness that we see would not be allowed there. Why? Because they were all about preserving the honor and the purity of the culture, preserving those things that are good about your culture. So I want to encourage you to think about your behaviors this week. Think about the representation not only of God. How am I representing God in the culture, right? But also, how am I representing myself? How am I representing my family? How am I representing my community? What is the imprint that I'm leaving in the culture for future generations? Am I leaving a positive imprint in my culture, in my world? What kind of imprint am I leaving? Am I going to leave behind a legacy where people make a mockery and make fun of my people because of the example and the impression that I left? Or am I going to be a positive, impacting representative in this culture? What kind of legacy am I leaving behind? All right. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because it is concerning. It is concerning. If you've ever been out of the country as a black person or as a black woman, you will come up against, you will encounter people who think a certain way about black people because of what they have seen in the media and on television. All right? So, no, it may not be you doing that one particular thing, but you have to think about the bigger picture and the image that has been sent out worldwide about black people. And many times those images have not been positive. So I have to ask myself, am I going to contribute to the positive images, or am I going to contribute to the negative images? Because again, there's money to be made in propagating stereotypes about black people. There's lots of money to be made promoting that black people are unintelligent, ratchet, ignorant, not serious, not to be taken serious. All of that. There's actually an industry that will pay you to promote that image. The question is, are you going to do that? Or are you going to be like those who would say, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to take on any venture that's going to put the people that I know and love in a negative light. That's a decision. That's a choice that we have to make. And we have to make it before the choice comes before us. We have to have a resolve before then. So we are back in Kingdom Disciples today. And I want to talk about the cost of commitment. This is a new chapter. The cost of commitment to discipleship. So we will start with our first piece here, which is allow me first. How many times have you heard someone say, if I had known what I was getting into, I never would have said yes? Many times, probably. Probably you have said it yourself more than once. That's why it's important to know what it truly means to be a kingdom disciple before you jump in with a deep commitment. Jesus calls disciples to follow him even though there are no guarantees. In fact, there is often a cost associated with true discipleship. Yes, that's not a popular concept these days, but it's the truth since it's in the scriptures. In Luke chapter 9, Jesus introduces us to three men from whom we learn great lessons on discipleship. Jesus didn't offer these men a special deal. What he was offering them was himself, and that was all they needed. He didn't guarantee a roof over their heads. He didn't guarantee them a promotion at work or even popularity in society. Being a kingdom disciple is not a sure way to success as the world defines it. Most of the early disciples died for their faith. John the Apostle lived as a lonely exile on the island of Patmos. Most of the early disciples died for their faith. They were murdered and killed off when they were unwilling to exchange what they knew about Christ for a new system. All right? Since Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, his call to discipleship is no easier now than it was then. These fully committed kingdom disciples didn't die in a nursing home surrounded by family and friends. Most of the early disciples died brutal deaths, Peter even being crucified upside down. Now, are you sure you want to be a kingdom disciple? This is not a fast-track ticket to the top. If you commit to truly being a kingdom disciple, there will be a cost. That part is guaranteed. Few are willing to pay these costs these days. That's why we have so few disciples. And that's why we have so little impact on the culture around us. Allow me first. Our biblical narrative takes place in Luke chapter 9 as Jesus and his disciples head toward Jerusalem. A man approaches Christ and says, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replies, "The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Seems like a strange answer to someone who asked to follow you, doesn't it? You can't place it in the category of nurturing or being seeker sensitive. Jesus basically told the man that he had no permanent home, and if he chose to follow him, neither would he. We are not told if the man decided to follow Jesus after that reply, but the context suggests he was not ready to be a kingdom disciple. He probably saw the hype, heard about the miracles, and wanted a cut of the action. He just didn't realize that cut came with a cost. I suspect that the second man mentioned in Luke 9 was listening to Jesus' conversation with the first. Jesus turned to this second man and said, "Follow me." This is a different case right away because this man did not offer to follow Jesus as the first man did. Most likely, he heard the answer and had a greater context within which to reply. He answered, "Permit me first to go and bury my father." But Jesus said, "Allow the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God." Now, I find it interesting because Jesus is telling this man to follow him, and then he turns around and gives him a directive about his past, and then he gives him a commission to go and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God. And he's not a disciple. He's not of the 12. But Jesus actually gives him a commission here. When you first read this, it may seem a little odd and cold-hearted how Jesus talks about the man's father. After all, aren't children supposed to honor their parents? Yes, they are. That's why insight into the Jewish culture sheds light on this passage that we may not glean at first glance. If the man's father were already dead, he would have been home. He wouldn't have been in a position to ask Jesus this question at all. This is because the Jews buried their dead within 24 hours. So his question was only hypothetical. This man stretched his semantics a bit to make his case sound dire. In doing so, he was telling Jesus that he wanted to put off being his disciple for an indefinite period of time until his father was gone and all the estate and family inheritance was settled. You know, this reminds you of the people who say, "I'm living my life the way I want to live it, and eventually I'll get saved," right? They'll say, "I know the Lord. I was raised in church. I'm pretty much doing my own thing right now. And at some point in the future, I will eventually give my life to God and start serving him." All right. So he had just overheard Christ stating clearly that he had no place to lay his head. And the man realized he would better secure his own financial security first. Otherwise, this whole discipleship thing could wind up hurting him financially. But Jesus wanted nothing of that. He told him to be a disciple, and he needed to go now and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God. Not later, but now. Jesus knew this man was asking for time to get his situation secure by waiting for his father to die in order to get his inheritance before he would go all in with God. When Jesus said, "Let the dead bury the dead," he was saying, "Let the spiritually dead bury the physically dead." Many Christians also do this. They aren't ready to fully commit. Maybe they're waiting for their careers to settle, the kids to be schooled, any number of things. But Jesus made it plain that discipleship demands immediate obedience, or it isn't kingdom discipleship. Because kingdom discipleship always comes with a cost. That's what a cross is, after all. Now let's consider the third man in verse 61 of Luke chapter 9. Like the first man, he takes the initiative. "I will follow you, Lord, but first permit me to say goodbye to those at home." That seems fair, right? You're getting ready to go away for a long time. You don't know if you're going to return. So you want to go home, pack your suitcase, say farewell to the people you know and love. But Jesus said, no one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Wow. If Jesus were a preacher today, I wonder how many would actually attend his church. He sees through the words, straight to the heart, and calls a spade a spade. The man, however, wasn't just wanting to go home, he was looking back. In New Testament days, if you were going on a long journey, you just didn't shout a quick goodbye. The farewell party the man referenced could have lasted a long time. What Jesus is objecting to here is not a goodbye handshake. He's talking about family making a potential disciple look back and think twice about giving everything up to follow him. I can imagine this man's family saying to him, "You're going to do what? You're going to follow this man you barely know to places you've never been? You don't know how he's going to take care of you? He can't even promise you a hotel room? This is not a good idea." But Jesus says anyone who looks back after starting out on the path of discipleship is not fit for his kingdom. Why is that? Because you cannot plow looking over your shoulder. If you're going to plow a straight furrow, your eyes have to be focused forward. Jesus is saying that if we try to plow looking back, we're going to mess up the kingdom agenda. Everywhere else, Jesus warned, remember Lot's wife. She left Sodom, but Sodom had not left her. And Jesus said that in Luke chapter 17, verse 32. She heard behind her all that fire and brimstone raining down from heaven, but she began to remember her friends back there, remember her possessions back there. She began to regret leaving, and she looked back despite the angel's warning. Let's just pause right there for a moment. People are looking back in spite of the fact that they have a directive to go forward. People are looking back in spite of having heard from the Lord to move. People are looking back in spite of having that spiritual encounter and that intervention. And God stopped her right there. Right there. In her tracks. When she looked back, she received judgment that turned her into a pillar of salt and made her unfit to go any further. Somebody needs to thank God for New Testament grace. Because how many salt pillars would we see out in the road today for all of the people who receive a call and a commission from God and then they turn around and look back? What a difference with Abraham in Genesis 22. God asked for and received Abraham's offer of sacrificing his son Isaac. The good news is that when you give God your first and best, he gives you his first and best. If you make God and his kingdom a priority, he knows just where the rams in the thicket hang out. You can trust him with everything, and in order to live as a kingdom disciple, you will have to do just that. The cost of commitment. I want you to think about your own life today. And as you go throughout this week, I want you to think about what has been your cost of commitment. And are you still willing to maintain that cost to commit to Christ? We're moving over into our next book, which is The Simplest Way to Change the World, Biblical Hospitality as a Way of Life. And in this book, we've been talking about the cost, right? We've been talking about the cost of being a hospitable person, the cost of making your environment or making your home a place that is open to those who may not yet be believers. And we've been talking about setting yourself up for success. We've been talking about making it a team sport, engaging other people in the process of ministering to the lost. And we've also been talking about creating a system so that you don't feel overwhelmed with this goal of hospitality and making yourself and availing yourself to those who may not know the Lord. So the next piece here we're talking about is simplifying your details of being hospitable and putting hospitality in your budget. When inviting people to your home, please don't feel pressured to do anything elaborate. The purpose is not to wow with the most amazing food or impress with your immaculately decorated home. In fact, if that were the purpose, it would not be hospitality that you're practicing. It might actually be showing off. So do whatever you need to in order to make hospitality feel less overwhelming. Simple meals are fine. Do something easy to eat and clean up, like tacos or pasta or a slow cooking dish or something that you can grill. Also, just because you are hosting doesn't mean you have to provide everything. You can ask them to bring something if that would be helpful. In fact, we found that most people want to contribute something. It makes them feel better about coming, so let them. The important thing to remember is that the purpose for having people over is relationship building, not the food. Feel free to cook normal, not so special meals because the meal is just what relationship happens over. While food is wonderful, it isn't the most important thing that will happen around your table. On the topic of cleanup, many people dread that moment where everyone leaves and you're staring at a mess, wanting nothing more than to not have to clean it up. We all wish cleanup was more like clap on, clap off. So get your guests in on the action. Many will actually offer to help clean without your asking. Your tendency may be to say, no, don't worry about that, we've got it. Which is fine if you really mean that and you want to serve your guests by cleaning up. But we actually let others help anytime they offer. For one, it makes cleanup easier. For another, it's actually more fun and more time to relationship build by cleaning together after the meal you just shared. After all, if we're pursuing the idea of sharing life and becoming a village, as we previously described, part of that will likely include washing dishes together. Put hospitality in your budget. In Matthew 6:21, Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." He was teaching that we can look at our budgets and quickly find what we love and care about most. It's possible for this principle to work the opposite way as well. What we leverage our money for can train our hearts to love that thing. This is the root of investing, because when we put our money into something, we now become more interested or more vested in that particular thing. If we buy stock in a company, our relationship to that company changes. We begin to love it more and we want it to succeed. Why? Because we're invested in it. We can train our hearts to love and value hospitality by putting resources toward hosting people in our homes. This doesn't have to be extravagant, and for most people, it can't be. But it may cost a little money to have people over consistently and provide food or drinks for them. Seeing this as a price of welcoming others as Christ has welcomed us will not only help us with the cost, but also to learn to love the fact that we get to leverage our resources for a God mission. Just as with any area of generosity, we learn that it is more fulfilling to share what we have with others than to spend it all on ourselves. I have a friend in my church named Jonathan. He recently got a raise at his job and he decided to put that money toward being hospitable to his neighbors. Think about that. What do you usually do first when you get a raise? Maybe think about a new car or some other increase in your standard of living. But Jonathan planned monthly cookouts for his neighborhood and passed out flyers to everyone he could. He also invited people from his small group and other church members who lived in his area so that he could have a good base of Christian community to invite others into. This practice has been fruitful, and it would never have come about without him deciding to dedicate what resources he could to practice hospitality as a way of life. I have a confession to make. The writer says, I recently started doing CrossFit. I also have a confession. I consistently make fun of CrossFit, the other writer says, as I believe it's for people who were never successful in sports growing up. And I am stunned that it took my fellow author this long to force some CrossFit illustration into this book. For the longest time, I heard about the benefits of CrossFit, but had no interest in joining because of how much effort it would require. Sure, I'd probably actually get in shape instead of rotting away physically as I was doing, but I'd also have to plan my schedule around it, get less sleep, and sweat a lot. I hate sweating. All of it sounded too difficult. Finally, I made myself try it for a few weeks, and I got addicted. It's exactly the type of atmosphere and accountability I needed to get back in shape. And if you were to ask me now if it's worth all the sweat and planning and effort, I would say absolutely, because I feel physically better than I ever have. Hospitality is a lot like that. It requires effort. It requires planning. It does require some sweat. But when paired with gospel intentionality, it is absolutely the best. And when you watch God eradicate other people's loneliness and transform their lives, it becomes addicting in the best way possible. So, questions to consider as you go into this week. What excuses do you make in order to avoid practicing biblical hospitality? What truths do you need to remember in order to counter your objections? Who can you team up with to practice team hospitality? Obviously, if you're married, this is the place to begin. But what other neighbors or church members could you partner with as well? In what ways can this make practicing hospitality easier? And lastly, what practical steps did you connect with? In what ways can they help you practice a hospitable lifestyle? What other steps can you take to build hospitality into your life? So, as a believer, I certainly believe in the fact that we should begin to build hospitality into our life. Build it into your life. What are some ways that you can do that? What are some ways that you can build hospitality in your community? I think it's important for us to start looking at that, because as the days go on and as the world gets more and more crueler to one another, people are going to identify God's disciples not just by the love we have for one another, but they're also going to identify us, number one, by the love we have for one another, but also by the hospitality that we're willing to show other people. So, believe it or not, I am done for today. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. I hope those who drop connection, I hope you're able to come back and watch the replay. I want to thank you again for your time and attention. Remember, tomorrow we actually hit episode 25. And so that's going to be a giveaway episode. We'll be doing a little teaching on immigration on tomorrow. And then we'll have some trivia that we'll be doing for those giveaways. If you are part of the We Dare Squad, you should be getting a package this week from me as a thank you for this first quarter. Thanking you for your giving into Daring Dialogues. And so tomorrow, join us for the giveaways. We've got some neat stuff that we're going to be giving away. And until next time, remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. Take care and God bless. Thank you again, YouTube viewers. Thank you for those of you who were on Periscope and hopped on over to the YouTube. I appreciate you all. You all have a wonderful day. Take care and God bless.